The thing that saved my life and my livelihood was a prototype medical alert pendant that my dead sister had kept on her nightstand. The one with a removable faceplate I'd designed so you could swap SIM cards without a screwdriver, and that my brother-in-law tossed into the kitchen trash as so much electronic junk, flecking it with coffee grounds and carrot peels. Inside its hollow cavity was a folded contract and a handwritten note on rice paper that would eventually land him in federal prison for 7 years and put me at the helm of a company now called Pendant of Perjury Alerts, where he assembles wristbands every Tuesday and Thursday in a smock that says Fall Detection of Lies, and every single box ships with his fraud docket number printed on the side. But before all that, I was just a retired nurse so fogged by grief, I nearly signed away everything on a linoleum kitchen floor while my own sister's husband stepped over my body to grab a document. My name is Liz, and for 32 years I worked as a registered nurse at St. Anne's Senior Care, a subacute facility where the air always smelled of antiseptic and warmed blankets, and where you learned to read a patient's decline in the way their skin smelled, the rhythm of their breathing, the tiny hitch in a pulse oximeter waveform before the alarms even triggered. I retired early at 52 because my sister Claire, a social worker with a sunburst smile and the organizational skills of a drill sergeant, had spent the last 5 years dreaming up a medical alert pendant company that would do more than just dial a call center. She wanted a device simple enough that her senior exercise group could wear it during chair yoga, with a fall detection accelerometer and a cellular chip that routed to a live monitoring center we would staff ourselves. The only thing she lacked was capital, and I had my entire nursing pension, $98,000, sitting in a low-yield credit union account that earned less than a grocery coupon. My husband Tom had been gone 6 years by then, leaving me with a tidy house and a lot of quiet, so I cashed out every cent and handed it to Claire and her husband Mark, my brother-in-law, a man who could sell ice to penguins and whose laugh filled a room until you realized it was the only thing he ever offered of substance. Claire was the heart. She spent weekends visiting assisted living facilities, demoing prototypes, and she got 40 seniors from the community center to sign up on the promise that their monitoring would be free for life, a promise we wrote into stone, and that she sealed with a handshake and a plate of her lemon squares. We incorporated as Lifeline Guardian Pendants, LLC. Mark handled sales and marketing. I was the technical tinkerer and capital partner. Claire ran operations and client relations. We sat down with Gerald Stroud, a notary with wire spectacles and ink-stained fingers who had handled our family's documents since my mother's estate, and signed a 50-50 equity split between me and Mark. Claire, not being an owner on paper, sat across the table from us with a yellow legal pad and insisted on a clause that would become my life raft. Section 14 of the operating agreement stated that any sale, merger, or dissolution of the partnership required the physical presence and wet ink signature of both Liz Abrams and Mark Denning before Gerald Stroud himself. No substitutes, no remote notarization, and any attempted transfer without both parties would be null and void, with the breaching party forfeiting all ownership rights. I remember Mark laughing and saying, "Claire, you're like a lawyer in a cardigan," and she just winked at me, her eyes sharp as glass. She knew something I didn't. Claire died on a Wednesday afternoon in September, the kind of day when the light turns golden and the autumn leaves are just beginning to curl. She was leading a seated yoga class at the community center, demonstrating a gentle twist, when a berry aneurysm in her anterior communicating artery burst. She was unconscious before she hit the floor, and the medics couldn't get her back. I got the call while I was at my workbench, fiddling with a new pendant housing that had a removable faceplate, a design feature I was testing, so you could access the internals without disassembling the whole unit. I never got to show her that prototype. I drove to the hospital in a fugue, my hands on the steering wheel but my mind replaying every conversation we'd had that week, and by the time I came home that night, Mark had already swept through Claire's things like a stagehand clearing a set, stuffing her nightgowns and her collection of tiny glass elephants into black garbage bags, which he left by the back door like they were just clutter. By Friday morning, the vultures had truly landed. Mark and his girlfriend Vanessa, a woman in a power suit who reeked of department store perfume and spoke in Instagram captions, had taken over the business checking account, changed the online banking password, and were explaining to me in my own living room how they would manage the transition, so I could grieve. Vanessa had the kind of smile that never reached her eyes, and she kept touching my arm like I was a fragile antique. Mark found the prototype pendant, the one with the removable faceplate, resting in a shoe box on Claire's nightstand next to her reading glasses and a half-empty mug of herbal tea. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger like a dead cockroach. "What's this piece of junk?" "Claire was always collecting trash," he said, and lobbed it into the kitchen bin, where it landed on a clump of coffee grounds and a banana peel. I watched it arc through the air, and something in my nurse's gut, the same instinct that tells you a patient is going to crash before the monitors do, made me wait until he and Vanessa were on the back patio making loud phone calls, then fish the pendant out and wipe it clean with a damp paper towel. The plastic was cold and a little scratched, but the faceplate was still secure. I slipped it into my coat pocket, feeling the weight of it like a secret. That evening, in the hollow quiet of my own kitchen, I sat with the pendant under a bright task light. The faceplate was a thin oval of white plastic held by 4 tiny tabs. I pried it off with the edge of a butter knife, the tabs giving way with a soft click, expecting to see the vacant slot for the optional secondary accelerometer chip. Instead, there was a small empty cavity, and inside that cavity was a miniature plastic sleeve folded so tightly it was nearly flat. I used a pair of tweezers from my old nursing kit to extract it, my hands trembling just slightly. Inside were 2 items. One was a wafer-thin sheet of rice paper, folded into a perfect square, covered in Claire's neat, looping handwriting. It read, "Liz, if you're reading this, I'm gone and Mark is already scheming. He's been running up debts on the company card and talking to buyers behind our backs. The real contract is here. Save yourself and save our seniors. The clause Gerald put in was my idea. You have more power than you know. Love, Claire." The second item was the original partnership agreement, all 12 cream-colored pages, signed and notarized, with Section 14 highlighted in pale yellow and a tiny sticky note that said, "This is your shield." I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, the smell of coffee grounds still faintly clinging to the plastic, and I felt my grief crystallize into something harder. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes the people who smile the most are hiding the sharpest knives. The next day, Mark and Vanessa sat me down in my own living room with a tray of lukewarm coffee and a folder of papers that smelled of fresh toner. Mark spoke in that soft, condescending cadence people use with the elderly, even though I was 52 and could deadlift a patient if I had to. "Liz, we've been looking at the books, and honestly, the business is a mess. Claire wasn't a great record keeper, but I have a buyer, a telehealth conglomerate called HealthSpan Global. They want to acquire our subscriber base for a very attractive number. The problem is, the partnership structure is complicated, and with you being so emotionally fragile right now, we don't want you to have to deal with any of this. We've drawn up a dissolution agreement. You just sign over your shares to me, and I'll handle the sale and make sure you're taken care of. We'll even pay you a settlement for your monitoring idea." He slid a check across the coffee table for $3,900. The memo line read, in block letters, "Monitoring settlement." I did the math in my head. That was exactly 1% of my original investment, a number so insulting it would have been funny if it weren't intentional. Vanessa leaned forward, her blouse crisp as a magazine page, her nails tapping the folder's edge. "It's really for the best, Liz. You'll come stay with us for a few weeks away from this house with all the memories. We have a lovely guest suite. Let us look after you." Every syllable was dipped in sugar and laced with control. They wanted me inside their house, where they could intercept my mail, monitor my phone calls, and keep me isolated until the ink dried on a document I never intended to sign. I looked at the check, at their expectant faces, and I forced a slight tremor into my voice, letting my eyes go unfocused like a woman who hadn't slept in a week. "I just can't think right now, I'm so foggy. Maybe in a few days when my head clears." Mark exchanged a glance with Vanessa that was meant to be subtle but read like a neon sign. He patted my hand. "Of course, take your time, but the buyer wants to move fast. We'll get you packed, just an overnight bag, and you can relax at our place." I let them maneuver me into the passenger seat of their Lexus, the leather still smelling new, and drive me to a McMansion with marble floors, towering ceilings, and a 6-car garage where only 2 cars sat. I was installed in a guest suite over the garage, all beige walls and impersonal floral prints, with a window that overlooked their manicured backyard and a door that didn't lock from the inside. I played the compliant, disoriented widow's sister, shuffling around in slippers, leaving half-finished cups of chamomile tea on every surface, and speaking in vague, hesitant sentences. And I watched. The red flags started stacking up like patient charts on a bad hospital shift. Mark spent hours on the back patio, pacing beside the pool, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but occasionally spiking loud enough for me to hear through the screen door when I cracked it an inch. I said I'd have the signature by Friday, Breyer. The wire is sitting in escrow, just waiting on the release form. Breyer, I later learned, was the acquisitions manager at HealthSpan, a man with a corner office and a bonus tied to closing the deal before the end of the quarter. Another call was to someone named Tessa at K International Bank in Belize, Mark's voice suddenly oily and familiar, as he asked about wire routing instructions for a corporate account, using words like intermediary bank and final credit. Meanwhile, Vanessa would be on her own phone with a car dealership, customizing a Mercedes Maybach with ventilated seats, a Burmester sound system, and some kind of special midnight blue paint that cost extra. She was spending money they didn't have yet, the kind of spending you see in people who have already counted cash that belongs to someone else. I also noticed that my mail never arrived. When I asked about it, Vanessa said airily, "Oh, we had it forwarded here, but nothing important yet, just flyers." The lock on the mailbox at my old house had been pried off, I later discovered. One afternoon about a week in, a pipe burst in the guest bathroom. It was a cheap copper elbow behind the wall, and suddenly there was water spraying across the tile, soaking the ceiling below and dripping into the laundry room. Mark and Vanessa ran in circles like startled pigeons, yelling, "Who do we call? What's the number for a plumber?" They didn't know where the main water shutoff was, and they certainly didn't know that a burst pipe needs to be stopped at the source before the drywall gets destroyed. I walked calmly to the garage, located the main valve above the water heater, and cranked it off with a heavy steel crescent wrench from my old nursing toolkit, a tool I'd kept in my car because a nurse's toolkit never really retires. The water stopped. Then I came back inside, used a pipe clamp and some 2-part epoxy putty I found in a junk drawer to seal the crack temporarily, and explained that a plumber would still need to solder a new elbow but the house wouldn't flood. Mark stood staring at me as I wiped my hands on a rag, a sliver of suspicion in his squint. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked, his voice a little too casual. I shrugged. "Nursing. You fix people, you learn to fix things. It's just plumbing." The foggy act was thinning, but I didn't care yet. I saw his jaw tighten, and I knew he was recalibrating his image of me. Over the next week, I cataloged every clue like a triage nurse assessing a disaster zone. Mark's home office was always locked, a standard quickset knob with a 5-pin cylinder that I could have opened blindfolded. I'd spent years picking the locks on medication carts when keys got lost on the med-surg floor, using curved hemostats and paper clips when the charge nurse was too busy to call engineering. So one evening when they left for a wine tasting at a local vineyard, I dressed in dark clothes, took a pair of curved hemostats from my kit, and filed down the tip of one to a thin tension wrench using a metal nail file I'd brought from home. I stood at that office door at dusk, inserted my homemade wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied light torque with my left hand, and used a straightened heavy-gauge paperclip as a rake, scrubbing the pins back and forth until the plug turned with a satisfying click. I stepped inside, my heart rate barely elevated. The office smelled of cologne and stale coffee, and a shredder bin overflowed with confetti-sized pieces of paper. On the desk sat a manila folder labeled HealthSpan Acquisition Final. I opened it with the kind of deliberate calm I used to reserve for withdrawing a central line. Inside was a document titled Mutual Dissolution and Release of Partnership Interest, dated the day after Claire's funeral. It bore my forged signature, a crude imitation that slanted the wrong way, the L too round, the B missing its loop. A notary stamp from a Teresa Parsons in the county next to ours was affixed to the last page, her commission number printed neatly. The document stated that I, Elizabeth Abrams, agreed to dissolve my 50% interest in Lifeline Guardian Pendants, LLC, and sell it to Mark Denning for a total consideration of $3,900, the same insulting check he'd waved at me. Below that was a stack of bank statements. A Solaris National Bank business account showed a pending incoming wire from HealthSpan Global for $550,000, set to clear upon delivery of a notarized dissolution. Then, I found a statement from K International Bank in Belize, an account solely in Mark Denning's name, already showing a $200,000 balance transferred from the company's operating account over the past 6 months under the label consulting fees. He'd been skimming, and the Belize account was his escape hatch. Behind that, like the last piece of a dark puzzle, I found loan documents. Mark had taken out a $500,000 line of credit in the company's name, with my forged signature as co-signer, and had drawn down over $400,000 of it to fund his lifestyle and pay off personal debts. If the HealthSpan sale didn't go through, that debt would come due immediately, and the bank would come after me personally, seizing my house, my savings, everything. I photographed every page with my phone front and back, taking care to capture the account numbers, the notary stamp, and the faint traces of white out where someone had clumsily altered a date. Then I heard the garage door rumble. I clicked the office door shut, relocked it from the inside with a quick flick of the hemostat through the gap, and was back in my room looking disoriented before they had their coats off. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing with a plan that was starting to form. That night, after the house fell silent, I dialed the phone number penciled at the bottom of Claire's rice paper note, the digits so small I had to use a magnifying glass. An older man answered with a practiced, professional tone. Alden Law, Gerald Stroud speaking. I identified myself, and his voice shifted from professional to urgent, a grandfatherly concern creeping in. Elizabeth, your sister came to see me 6 months ago, alone. She was pale and determined. She suspected Mark was siphoning funds and had approached a buyer. She had me draft a codicil to the partnership agreement and instructed me to file a UCC-1 financing statement on her interest, a public record filing that puts the world on notice that a secured interest exists. In plain terms, she created a dead man's switch. If any attempt was made to sell the business without your physical presence and signature before me, the specific notary named in Section 14, the entire transaction is void, and under the operating agreement, the non-breaching partner becomes the sole owner. Moreover, Claire set up an irrevocable trust for the seniors' monitoring, tied directly to the company's subscriber fee revenue. If the company is sold, the trust triggers a freeze on the proceeds until a court approves the transfer, and the freeze cannot be lifted without your written consent. She left me a letter to deliver to you upon her death, but I was waiting for the executor to notify me. Mark had been keeping me away from all official proceedings, telling me you were too distraught to speak. Gerald promised to courier me the trust documents and then said something that shifted the ground under my feet. There's already a bank compliance officer looking into this. Solaris National flagged the unusual wire requests and the sudden line of credit. She's been trying to reach you, but your mail is being redirected. Her name is Raquel Munoz. Call her. She's expecting to hear from you. Raquel Munoz was a senior investigator with Solaris National's Financial Crimes Division, a woman with a razor-cut bob, glasses with thin titanium frames, and a patience that seemed inexhaustible. We met at a diner off the interstate, the kind with vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like the pot hasn't been cleaned in a decade. I laid out everything I'd photographed, sliding my phone across the table while a country song played too loudly overhead. She studied the images, scrolling methodically, and shook her head. The HealthSpan wire is sitting in a suspense account right now, held pending the notarized dissolution. Mark has been calling our commercial banking team every day, getting increasingly angry, trying to force it through. But the notary stamp on that forged document is from a Teresa Parsons, and we've already flagged her as a person of interest because she's notarized multiple fraudulent documents for a debt relief scam in the next county. Your sister's UCC filing gives us the legal standing to freeze the entire transaction, but we need proof that Mark is acting with intent to defraud you, something that ties him directly to the Belize account and the forgery. If we can get his login credentials and his electronic communications, we can lock this case. How comfortable are you with small electronics? She handed me a device that looked like a standard USB flash drive, unlabeled and matte black. This is a keylogger. It captures every keystroke typed on the computer it's plugged into, then stores it on a small internal memory. No software installation, no trace, just a hardware interceptor. If you can plug it into his desktop for even 15 minutes, we can get the credentials we need. The risk is yours, but the reward is his entire house of cards collapsing. I went back to the McMansion, the keylogger tucked in the lining of my purse like a tiny promise. That same evening, I told Vanessa I was having some tightness in my chest, a little indigestion, I said, and needed to lie down. They left me alone to attend a dinner party at a neighbor's house, and I knew I had a window of at least 2 hours. I waited until their taillights disappeared down the long driveway, then returned to the locked office, this time with a pretext of looking for a phone charger I'd claimed I'd dropped. I found his desktop tower under the desk, a generic black box, and while I was down there on my knees, I plugged the keylogger into a rear USB port where it would be invisible unless someone crawled behind the desk and shined a flashlight. I gave it a gentle push until it clicked, then stood up, made a show of sneezing, and called out, "Found it!" as if I'd just spotted a charger. I left the device in place for the full 2 hours while they were gone, my heart thumping in a way that felt strangely alive. The next morning, while they were distracted with pancakes and orange juice and a loud argument about which hotel to book in Cancun, I slipped back into the office on the pretense of returning a pen, crouched down, and retrieved the keylogger with a quick, silent motion. I handed it to Rackwell in a parking lot exchange at a strip mall, the whole thing feeling like a spy movie I'd never expected to star in. The data it captured was a prosecutor's dream. Mark's login for K International Bank, complete with a 2-factor authentication code he'd typed into a chat window. The exact wire instructions he used to move company funds to Belize, including the intermediary routing numbers. A series of emails with the health span acquisitions manager discussing the streamlined dissolution that would conveniently bypass the troublesome original partner and the whole sticky issue of Section 14. And a draft email to his defense attorney, unsent but captured as keystrokes in the compose window, that included the phrase, "If she refuses to sign, we can get a conservatorship over her as mentally incompetent. That should override any partnership clause." They were planning to have me declared unfit if I so much as hesitated, to take my own voice away from me. The keylogger also captured the password to his encrypted email account, which Rackwell's forensic team used to recover deleted messages between Mark and Teresa Parsons, the notary, negotiating the fee for her stamp, $200 in cash, left in an envelope under a park bench. I had everything I needed, but I had to be absolutely certain there was no lingering shred of decency in the man my sister had married. So I staged a medical emergency. I picked a Tuesday morning when Mark and Vanessa were in the kitchen, the health span deal on speakerphone, discussing the final payment schedule with a man whose voice crackled with impatience. I'd practiced the collapse in front of my bathroom mirror, recalling the exact sounds and movements of a STEMI from 100 codes I'd worked over the years. I clutched my chest, let out a guttural groan, and fell hard onto the kitchen floor, my arm twisted under me, my breathing shallow and ragged, my eyes half open but unseeing. The tile was cold against my cheek, and I heard the phone conversation pause. I lay there, a perfect facsimile of a woman in the middle of an anterior wall myocardial infarction. Mark glanced down at me, his face briefly annoyed, then he stepped right over my body without breaking stride. He grabbed a folder from the counter, the one with the notarized signature page I was supposed to sign at the bank, and said to Vanessa, "Is she going to be a problem? We need her alive for the bank appointment tomorrow, but if she codes now, I inherit her shares by default anyway, right? The partnership agreement says upon death, interest passes to the surviving partner." Vanessa laughed, a dry little sound without a molecule of warmth, and checked her nail polish. The dissolution's already got her signature, technically. If she dies, it just gets cleaner. Let her lie there, we can call an ambulance after the wire clears. They won't be able to trace the exact time of death that precisely, especially with a brain bleed like Claire had. They left me on the cold tile for 12 full minutes. I counted, because nurses always count. 12 minutes while they finalized the cover sheet for the health span wire transfer, Vanessa humming a pop tune under her breath. Then, as if remembering I was a prop in their scheme, Mark knelt down, lifted my head just enough to check my pupils, and said in a voice dripping with fake concern, "Liz, sweetie, you're okay. You just had a little episode. Let's get you to bed." I let them half carry me to my room, my expression dazed, my mind colder than a morgue drawer. Any residual grief for my sister's husband was extinguished. I was no longer dealing with family. I was dealing with a man who would have watched me die on the floor to get his hands on $550,000. The next morning, they dressed me in a navy blazer that Vanessa said looked professional and puts people at ease, and drove me to the Solaris National Bank corporate branch in the glassy downtown office park. The plan, as they'd explained it in the car with patient, condescending smiles, was simple. I would sit in a conference room with a business banker named Mr. Kelsey, sign the dissolution agreement on the line that matched my forged sample, and hand over my driver's license for notary verification. Then they'd slide me a cashier's check for another insulting amount the wire would release, and I'd be discarded back to that guest suite where Mark would probably start working on the conservatorship papers. In the car, Mark kept up a running monologue designed to soothe a frail mind. "Just sign, Liz. It's 3 lines. Claire would have wanted you taken care of." This is what she would have done, what she asked me to do, actually. She knew the business was struggling. The lie settled like acid on my tongue, but I said nothing. We were escorted to a conference room with a mahogany table, a pitcher of ice water, and a view of the parking lot where the sun glinted off windshields. Mr. Kelsey, a pale man with a weak handshake and a plastic pen holder monogrammed with the bank's logo, laid out the dissolution agreement in duplicate, the notary block empty and waiting. Mark and Vanessa flanked me like prison guards, their shoulders tight with anticipation. I lifted the pen they placed in front of me, a heavy silver roller ball, and looked at the forged signature already on the page as a sample, the same crude fake that slanted the wrong way. I set the pen down gently. Mark's smile tightened by a millimeter, a little muscle in his jaw twitching. "Go on, Liz," he said, his voice straining to stay gentle but cracking at the edges. I looked him directly in the eye for the first time in weeks, my voice steady as a metronome. "I'm not signing anything. You forged my signature once. I have the original contract in a safe deposit box with Claire's note, and as of this moment, this transaction is void. Section 14 requires my physical presence in front of Gerald Stroud, and you've got neither me nor him. I've been recording every conversation we've had since I found the forgery." I pointed to the lapel of my blazer, where I had clipped a tiny lapel microphone wired to an old digital voice recorder I'd used for dictating patient notes back on the floor, a device that had captured his voice stepping over my body. Mark's face cycled from white to crimson in the span of a heartbeat. He lunged toward the documents, his chair scraping back, but before he could reach the table, the conference room door opened. 2 men in dark suits walked in, their posture unmistakably law enforcement, followed by Raquel Munoz and a uniformed bank security officer. One of the suits, a federal agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force, held up a badge and an ID card. "Mark Denning, you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. Keep your hands where I can see them." Vanessa tried to back toward the door, her heels skidding on the carpet, but was met by another agent who recited her rights in a calm monotone. Teresa Parsons, the notary who'd been waiting in the lobby to stamp the final page, was also picked up, her handbag spilling with fresh notary journals that would later show a pattern of side payments and backdated stamps. The entire scheme collapsed at the exact moment they needed me to sign. A trapdoor engineered by a dead woman who had seen the betrayal coming months before it arrived, and had reached from beyond the grave to protect me. The health span acquisition was officially voided, the escrow wire returned to the buyer, and under the breach clause of Section 14, the company reverted entirely to me as the sole owner. Gerald Stroud filed the trust documents with the probate court, freezing the remaining company assets and ensuring that the seniors' free monitoring would be funded in perpetuity, exactly as Claire had wanted. The forensic audit that followed, conducted by Raquel's team and a federal accountant with the tenacity of a bloodhound, uncovered that Mark had skimmed nearly $300,000 in total, including the Belize transfers, the line of credit drawdowns, and a series of smaller fraudulent reimbursements for phantom consulting fees. He was charged with 12 counts and eventually pleaded guilty to wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, receiving a sentence of 7 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole until he served at least 85%. Vanessa was convicted of conspiracy and obstruction and drew 3 years in a women's minimum security facility, her power suits swapped for a beige jumpsuit. The Belize account was repatriated under a mutual legal assistance treaty, the stolen funds returned to the business, and the fraudulent credit line was declared void and expunged from my financial record, leaving the company battered but solvent and in my hands. I used the recovered capital to restructure and rebrand. The new name is Pendant of Perjury Alerts, and our tagline is the fall detection that always tells the truth. I hired back the monitoring staff Mark had fired, and I honored Claire's promise by expanding the free monitoring program to now cover 62 seniors across 3 community centers, with plans to add a 4th. But the poetic justice came when the judge imposed restitution. Mark claimed he was destitute, so the court ordered 500 hours of community service, and I petitioned, through my attorney, to have him serve it at the very company he tried to gut. The judge agreed, noting the irony. So now, every Tuesday and Thursday, Mark Denning sits in a small glass-walled workshop at our warehouse, assembling wristband straps for the pendants. He wears a bright orange smock that I had custom-made, with fall detection of lies printed on the back in heavy block font, and convicted felon fraud docket #23CR0041 on the front pocket. He uses a small screwdriver to attach the plastic clips, his fingers clumsy, his expression a permanent scowl that I can see from my office window. I stand there sometimes with a cup of coffee, just watching. Every product box that ships from our facility includes a small card with a QR code that links directly to the U.S. Department of Justice press release detailing his crimes and conviction. He has to pack those boxes himself, sliding the card into each sleeve, a living disclaimer for his own deceit, his face a warning label. My restitution is quieter. I take a modest salary, and the business is finally profitable, but the real reward is knowing that 41 pendants, at last count, are clipped to the waistbands of seniors who can push a button and get help if they fall. Claire's name is listed as co-inventor on the patent for the removable faceplate, and I framed her little rice paper note and hung it in the lobby behind the reception desk, next to a photograph of her at that community center. The note reads, "You have more power than you know." She was right. I did. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this tale of quiet justice served ice cold resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories where the ones who watch and wait get the last word. Until next time, keep your eyes open and trust the people who earn it, not the ones who just smile the loudest.